I'm Daniel Dale, and I'm ready to start digging deep.
I'm Mark Sutcliffe. Welcome to Digging Deep, presented by Zen Books. Digging Deep is a series of conversations. I go one-on-one with interesting, thoughtful, accomplished people in business, music, media, entertainment, even space exploration. It's all about hearing people's life stories and the powerful lessons, valuable observations, and unique perspectives that they can share with all of us, things we can all learn from. Here's how it works. We start off with some rapid-fire questions. The goal there is to reveal little pieces of information about the guest, have a little bit of fun, and then we start digging deep into those stories and life lessons. Our guest today is Daniel Dale. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. I really enjoyed it. Daniel Dale occupies a fascinating place in American politics. He is a reporter in CNN's Washington Bureau, and his job is to fact-check President Donald Trump, along with other presidential candidates this year and other politicians. So as a result, he has more than 800,000 followers on Twitter. And this isn't the first time that Daniel Dale has been at the epicenter of major political news coverage. Before he joined CNN, Daniel spent over a decade at the Toronto Star, and during that time, he covered the many wild events during the administration of Toronto Mayor Rob Ford. And then he moved on to become the Washington bureau chief for the Star from 2015 to 2019. And that was when he became the first journalist to start fact-checking every false statement from Trump, beginning during his campaign for president in 2016. In our conversation, Daniel and I talk about a wide range of things. There are some really great lessons in here about how to develop your niche, about how to avoid doing what other people expect you to do, about seizing opportunities as he did, plus how he actually fact-checks the president, some of the similarities and differences between Rob Ford and Donald Trump, and whether politics has been changed forever by the events of the last 4 years. You might actually be surprised by his answer to that question. Oh, and we also talk about his love of karaoke rapping. Yes. So just before we get started, I just wanted to mention, if you like what you hear, then please post a review on iTunes and elsewhere, and share this podcast with people you know, and please subscribe to it. And if you're looking for more information about the show, if you want to read my daily blog where I post interesting observations and lessons for business people, for entrepreneurs, for leaders, every single day of the year, or subscribe to my newsletter, The Weekly Dig, which has 5 very quick items that I've learned about each week, then please go to our website. It's letsdigdeep.com. That's letsdigdeep.com. You can also find a link there to my TEDx talk. Now, let's start digging deep with Daniel Dale. Daniel, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And I've really been looking forward to our conversation because you have had this extraordinary career already. You're still a young guy, but you've been in 2 different places where the world's attention has been focused, and you've played a prominent role. And I can't wait to hear your perspective on what you've gained from some of these experiences. So I'm very excited about that.
Thank you.
So let's start with some rapid fire questions. What is your fondest childhood memory?
I'm going to say going to tournaments on my fast pitch softball team as a kid, being in like Peterborough and Kitchener and playing ball and staying in hotels with water slides. That was great.
That sounds great. Who was your hero when you were 10 years old?
Around that era, it would have been like Robbie Alomar, Doug Gilmour, so somebody on the Leafs and Jays, between age 6 and 13.
Yeah. And what did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
I honestly thought I would be a journalist for a long time, starting from like 7th, 8th grade. I had a couple of detours, which we can talk about, but this was sort of my path.
What is your life story in 6 words? I'm challenging you here as a writer, Daniel.
Oh my gosh. I can't do it. I don't know. It's too hard. This is the worst journalistic assignment. I have to pass. I don't know.
Okay. What is your greatest mistake and what did you learn from it?
Well, it worked out fine, but I think choosing to go to business school for university, I thought it was kind of prestigious. It's sort of what I should do, and I just hated it. And it taught me, don't do things because you should do them or because they're prestigious. When you can, if you can afford it, follow your passion.
Yeah, that's a great point. For what do you feel most grateful?
Right now, I mean, aside from the obvious, health, friends, family, I would say like just being unemployed, employed, not unemployed, unemployed journalist, a journalist receiving a salary. There's been so many layoffs, great people losing jobs. To have a role right now, I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. What has been the best year of your life so far and why?
Um, I'd say, well, it can't be this year. I mean, they've all been pretty good. I would say last year, maybe just, getting to CNN, having this prominent role, having a good life with my partner, Kelsey, here in Washington. It was pretty good.
And what's been the toughest year of your life so far?
Again, I can't complain too much. I would say maybe professionally, the year I had with Rob Ford at the end, like 2013, 2014, when the person I was covering was going after me personally, and I was taking a lot of vitriol from his supporters. But on the scale of things, it wasn't too bad.
What one person has had the greatest impact on your life?
I'd say both my parents. I mean, it's the obvious cliched answer, but they've shaped me for sure.
And we'll talk more about that, about how they shaped you. What's the most important lesson that you share with other people?
Um, I don't know. I mean, when I talk to journalism students, I tell them to read. I tell them to find a niche. Maybe that's my professional lesson. I sort of made my way in Washington because I found a niche where, this mass of other people weren't filling it. So, I tell people professionally, at least, even in a field that seems daunting or well traveled, look for the holes, look for the openings, and try to worm your way in there.
What would you say is the biggest factor that led you to where you are today?
I would say, well, for a while I thought I might want to be in politics, and then I realized that my nature is that I don't like to be blindly on any team, whether it's left or right, or I like having sports teams to cheer for, but my nature is, with politics, I want to be a critic of everyone, and so I think coming to that realization after sort of dabbling in politics briefly led me to realize, what, why don't I just be in journalism like I thought I should be at first, and just take jabs at everyone, and that feels better to me.
What would people be most surprised to learn about you?
Maybe that I'm a big country music fan. I love It's pretty
Okay.
much all I listen to so far, thanks to my journalism colleague Sarah Bosveld, who's a great country fan and singer. She really got me into it like 5, 6 years ago. So I'm a Thornhill born, Washington resident journalist who loves country.
Nice. What's your secret talent?
Um, it's not that good, so I'm not that talented, but I'm known to do some karaoke rapping. I like to do rap songs from the '90s. People seem impressed by this. I think mostly just because I look how I look and my personality is how it is. So it's a quasi talent.
Right. But that is definitely off brand.
It's off brand, yes.
What is the most fun you've ever had? Maybe that's the same answer. I don't know.
Maybe honestly, my favorite things to do are be at a Raptors game, which we can't do right now, obviously, and be at karaoke with friends, just sing songs and rapping.
What's the scariest thing you've ever done?
I think maybe a couple of journalism assignments. I was sent as an intern. I was in my early 20s to cover a hurricane in Jamaica, and I was really unprepared for it. And I don't know why they sent me. It was a vote of confidence, but I had no idea what I was doing. And I had some scary moments covering the riots in Baltimore related to the Freddie Gray incident a few years back. So yeah, not too bad, but new for me, so a bit frightening.
What's your boldest prediction for the future?
I don't want to make one. I've gotten out of the prediction game after the 2016 election when I think some of my coverage contain an implicit prediction that Hillary Clinton was going to win this election easily. So I resolved to not do that anymore.
Okay. What would be the message of your commencement address if you were speaking to a group of students?
It's hard. I mean, I'd encourage people to know that it gets better. I mean, these are tough times. People entering the job market now, or entering university now, where in the U.S. at least, a lot of them can't go to school or can't have the experience they wanted to. So the cliche message that things pass.
And what book are you most likely to recommend to others?
Oh, that's very hard.
You can say more than one.
Well, I mean, I have shameless promos for some of my good friends have written great books, like my former colleague Robin Doolittle has written 2 great books about the Rob Ford incident and about the handling of sexual harassment and assault. My great friend Darshana Bhaskaramurti has a book coming out about a friend of hers who was an interesting character and who died. It's about the process of him dying. I thought it was fascinating, so I'll go with my friends for now.
All right. Daniel, thank you for answering those questions. In just a moment, we'll start digging deep. We're just going to take a quick break so I can tell you a little bit more about the presenting sponsor of Digging Deep, ZenBooks. ZenBooks is Canada's go-to cloud accounting firm. They are not your typical accounting firm. I know the founders, Colin and Eric. I've worked with them for several years. And here's why I think you should consider working with them too. First of all, they bring a fresh, unique, modern approach to what is a very old-fashioned industry. These guys were working remotely and in the cloud long before it became cool. ZenBooks also uses technology to your advantage. I think this is really important. They give you the tools and analysis you need to monitor your business in real time. That's so valuable right now when everything changes so quickly. Yes, they're a virtual accounting firm, but that doesn't mean they're offshore, and it doesn't mean they're inattentive. ZenBooks combines the efficiency and effectiveness of a cloud accounting service with all the benefits that you'd want from a trusted advisor, high-level advice, and strategic support. Now, here's what I think is going to happen if you work with ZenBooks. You'll probably start out taking advantage of their cutting-edge cloud accounting solutions, but in the long run, I think you'll stay with them because of their strategic guidance and problem solving. Among their core values, they specifically list being candid and proactive. Isn't that exactly what you want from a trusted advisor? Look, even if you're already working with an accountant or a bookkeeper, or you have some accounting staff on your team, I think you should still talk to ZenBooks and learn more about their tools and their expertise. Check out ZenBooks at zenbooks.ca. That's zenbooks.ca. We are digging deep with Daniel Dale, which is very alliterative. You have the same initials as the podcast. So you mentioned your parents and the impact that they've had on your life. Tell me more about that.
Well, they're both great people. My mom is a big reader. She's a perfectionist. She once wanted to go into journalism and didn't happen for her. But they raised me with reading newspapers, reading the Toronto Star every day. Always buying me Sports Illustrated. I initially wanted to be a sports journalist. My dad, he was awesome. They imparted, I think, a strong sort of sense of morality. I guess a lot of us have those, but some of the feelings that I think drive my journalism. Holding powerful people accountable, and the importance of standing up for truth, I think, came from them. And then just in my personal life, like my dad was always coaching the sports teams, driving me to baseball and hockey and stuff. And again, I got into this business because I wanted to be a sports writer, and I think that came from my dad.
Why didn't you end up a sports writer?
It was just sort of chance. At first, my first internship was with the sadly now defunct Guelph Mercury, covering not small town but smallish city sports, and I loved it. And then, usually when you get hired by a bigger paper, you're a general assignment reporter. So I was covering, courts and crime and stuff at the Toronto Star. And then I kind of realized, I could feel like I was doing something, meaningful and serious during the day, and then just go home and be a sports fan at night. And that might be more fun than making sports my full-time job and having some of the joy come out of it. So when I got into politics and felt sort of a sense of fulfillment, covering Toronto City Hall, I thought, what, this is the best balance.
You mentioned that you were interested in being a journalist at a young age. What sparked that interest for you?
I think it was that I loved reading so much, and for some reason, I love newspapers and magazines. I never thought I'd be in TV in any capacity. This has sort of happened by accident, but just loving words and loving, just being fascinated by breaking news, and even reading good writing from sports columnists and other columnists. It was just always something, like, even from age 9, 10, that fascinated me.
Did you subscribe to Sports Illustrated, and did you read that kind of sports journalism at that age?
Yeah, I remember I loved Rick Riley, who's a famous Sports Illustrated writer, Steve Rushin, even people at the Toronto Star, Dave Proudfoot, or many others. Sorry, Jim Proudfoot and Dave Perkins. I got that wrong. Yeah, I was always like, it was the first thing I would read. I would devour it.
Yeah, those two writers you mentioned from Sports Illustrated were two of my favorites as well.
Yeah,
I was a
they're
long
great.
time subscriber.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of detours along the way, and I think you alluded to them already: business school and dabbling in politics a little bit. So, can you talk more about those?
Yeah. So I went to business school, and I thought it turned out correctly that I could be in journalism even with a business degree. So it wasn't a mistake in that sense. But I thought, I don't know, it seemed like kind of the thing that people did, and I was worried about the state of the journalism industry, and I thought, just go for security, and at least where I was, like, people had this kind of strange sense of respect for the Schulich School of Business at York University as something people would compliment you for doing. I think that was more of a factor to me at that age, 17, 18, that people thought it was impressive. So I did it, and quickly found that I just found it terrible. I mean, I know it's a great education for a lot of people, and it's good in the rankings and stuff, but it just, it was more quantitative. We didn't have, like, deep, intellectual discussions, really, like you think about when you talk about university. It was more like, learn how to discount cash flow. And I'm just like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to learn how to do a balance sheet or income statement. And I think sometimes it's helpful to learn, what you don't want to do and why, like, or even if it's a job within your field, like, why don't I like this? And that helps helps drive you to something you like better. And so I kind of had, like, an early life crisis at age, I don't, what would it have been, like 21 or so, and thought, what would I find more fulfilling? And it was journalism. I interned I was sort of around the political spectrum. Like, I volunteered for a Liberal campaign when I was very young, for an NDP campaign when I was a bit older. I also had a sort of a conservative period where I interned at a conservative think tank in Washington, the American Enterprise Institute, as I was sort of rebelling against what I thought was an overly left-wing environment on the York University campus. And then, in every environment, I was kind of like, well, I don't agree with this about this group. I don't agree with this about that group. And I was like, maybe I'm just not meant to be in this environment where you have to just sort of pick your side and back them, this sort of partisan world. And so that was a really helpful realization as well.
One of the things that you said earlier that I think really resonates is that you have to examine your motivations, I guess, and you're there. Often you can end up in a situation where your passion might take you in one direction, but your rational mind is suggesting, what, maybe I should get a real job, or I should, right? Something along those lines, right? That there's that constant kind of struggle between what might seem like the practical approach or the best path forward in that direction, and maybe even what other people expect you to do, and then what you truly want to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's it can be hard to differentiate between what your brain is telling you should do, and what is coming from you yourself, and what is coming from external influences, but I think it's important to try to realize, what will bring you true happiness. And I know it's kind of a privileged thing to say, like for a lot of journalists, there's so few jobs these days. You just take the job that will make a living for your family, get you through life. But if you do have the options, if you're fortunate enough, I think for me, it's important, like not to just do something because it's the next step or because it's prestigious, but because it's truly the thing I want to be doing.
Yeah, and obviously you have to have a blend of the two, because you can chase dreams that are not realistic,
Yeah,
or even just don't work out for whatever reason, right? And
right.
then if that means you have no income, that's not healthy either, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, One of the things that you alluded to that I thought was interesting is when you talked about finding your niche, because um, if and this is only one metric, obviously, but you have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, because you're primarily, I think, because you're doing one thing, fact checking the president of the United States. If you were just generally reporting on politics in the US, you probably would have a fraction of the followers. And again, I know that's only one metric, but it is a reflection of how, especially in this world today, the more specialized you are, and the more you're identified with one thing, the more likely you are to have a following, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. And when I talk to journalism students, I also tell them, you're probably passionate about something, or you might be fascinated by something. It could be a particular country or region in the world. It could be a particular technology or realm of technology. And I think if you can make yourself the man or the woman about something, you have a greater chance of being useful and valued, both in a social sense and financially, than if you're a generalist who is like, I just want to be in journalism. If you're great with data or with charts or with making particular quantitative matters comprehensible to an average audience. If you can find the time to make yourself good at one thing or an expert on one thing, I think that helps.
And we'll talk about how this sort of evolved for you, how you got to this space. But before we do that, you've covered Rob Ford and Donald Trump, two of the most volatile administrations in recent time. And so, how did that come to be? I mean, is it you, Daniel? First of all, are you the common denominator
I'm
here?
causing, yeah. I think someone tweeted to me at one point, like, don't start covering the United Nations, like you'll ruin the whole world this time. No, it's complete coincidence. I mean, well, the Rob Ford thing was not a coincidence. I was sent to City Hall because the Star felt, okay, we have this new mayor. He's very interesting. Whatever you think of him, he's going to make a lot of news. And so we need to beef up the bureau. So they sent me there. I think it was like a week into his tenure in December 2010. The Trump thing, which is coincidence, the Ford era ended. The Washington opportunity, or the Rob Ford era ended, of course. The Washington opportunity came open at the Star. It had always been something I was interested in, so I applied. I got it, and then there were 6 months where it seemed like, oh, Jeb Bush is the favorite for the Republican nomination when the primary opens. So I had 6 sort of Trump-free months between January 2015 and June 2015. And then in June, I was there when Trump launched his campaign at Trump Tower. And then from then on, it was just Trump dominated. He went to the top of the polls basically right away, like within I think within a week, but at least within the month. And then he just took over everything. He sort of took over my life, at least professionally.
So, how has the experience of covering these two administrations, how has that shaped your view of the world, your view of politics?
Well, I think it is, first of all, it's taught me that we can't be too quick to dismiss people who seem unconventional or unprecedented. For a long time, I think my coverage in 2016 reflected a belief that, because someone like this had never been elected, someone like this probably would not be elected, and he won. I think it taught me a lot about voters, both experiences, because in both cases, there's this entire group of voters who we didn't really know existed or in such large numbers. I think especially with Ford, for me, because I think with Trump, it's like, okay, we knew that there's a significant constituency of Republican voters who harbor, racial or religious, anti-Muslim animus. We know that there's a constituency of people who feel they've been left behind, that trade deals haven't served them, that wish their party was harsher on immigration. So Trump's policy positions were in line with a lot of things we knew existed. With Ford, I think it's like, okay, this is Toronto, Toronto has elected a bunch of conservative mayors, but it's like, the John Tory kind of conservative, not a Rob Ford kind of conservative. So seeing the depth of the base was really educational, that, we have blind spots as journalists, as so-called elites, even in our own city, let alone a country. There might be people we don't understand or we haven't paid attention to. I think it's a very important lesson.
Yeah, and I think there's something else going on there too, where the people who are opposed to Donald Trump or were opposed to Rob Ford think that it's enough to look at the packaging and the presentation and the unorthodox elements of their delivery and their approach and all of that, and think that that's going to be enough to stop them from getting elected. But there's something else going on that I think the opponents are sometimes missing what's happening there that leads to them getting elected, right?
Yeah, and I think that's an important point about their manner. I mean, I think the key point is that the manner that is so off-putting to a large number of people, and I think in both cases it's a larger number of people. With Ford, like, he had the support of a minority of the public. With Trump, his disapproval rating is higher than his approval rating. Nonetheless, there are a lot of people who like someone who, sticks his finger in everyone's face or uses curse words or insults people, who's perceived. And I think, as a fact checker, it's important to realize that for a lot of people, this kind of manner, this aggressive, belligerent manner, appears as honesty. So this kind of manner makes people think, oh, they tell it like it is, when in fact, in both cases, they are not telling it like it is. They're lying serially, almost endlessly, but because they're, they seem less polished or less lawyerly or something, that seems more authentic or honest than an actual lawyer who is telling the truth more often, but seems, more careful or studied.
There are lots of people, particularly in Toronto and in Canada, who have made the comparison between Rob Ford and Donald Trump and have even suggested that Rob Ford was some form of precursor to Donald Trump. I can see some elements of the argument there. I also think there are some significant differences, including the fact that Rob Ford was in politics before he became mayor, that it was, he wasn't an outsider the way Trump was, and he was... there were some aspects of his politics, like returning all of his constituents' phone calls and serving constituents as best he could, that I don't see this same element in Donald Trump. But so, what do you think about that comparison?
Yeah, I think there are clearly a lot of similarities. The manner, the lying, the going after perceived elites and sacred cows, going after the media. So I don't discount the comparison at all. I think there are significant differences, like the ones you identified. Ford being, he ran as an outsider, but he had been, he'd served. This history of constituent service, this personal connection. I think also the extent of Ford's non-white base is important. He was very popular in certain pockets of the city that are predominantly visible minorities, a high percentage of immigrants, where, Ford, tried to pit people against each other, but it wasn't along racial lines in the way that Trump has. And I think even the lying, like, I think Rob Ford clearly was a frequent liar. He made a lot of stuff up, but I don't think there's a comparison. I think Trump is a way bigger liar. And I think Ford's lying was more traditional. It was like, okay, I've smoked crack cocaine. I can't admit that because that'll ruin my career. So I'm going to deny it. I'm going to lie about that. Or I'm going to exaggerate. He would exaggerate on his key policies like subways, where Trump is lying about everything for like no reason at all. Like the little tiny, everything, every word out of his mouth, you have to be suspicious of because he's probably stretching or fabricating or twisting. So I think, as a liar, Trump vastly exceeds Ford.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that because there is, I think it can be argued that there are many, many people in politics who lie, and you can see the motivation behind that. It's part of it. Unfortunately, it has become part of the system of how you build your brand and destroy the other guy's brand in politics. So we can come back to that. But when you reflect back on the Ford era in Toronto, when you think about it now, some time has passed. What are some of your reflections on that, on a period that was really, I think, to a lot of people, stranger than fiction? That if you'd written that as a fictional story, nobody would have believed it.
No, I think I have so many distinct memories, just like weird situation, like being at the high school football field because we had to try to talk to the mayor, before or after he coached a game, live tweeting football game because I had nothing else to do while sitting there, or just being at a jungle gym, a playground Rob Ford was opening, I think near the Gardner, and seeing the mayor, the 300-pound mayor, climbing on the jungle gym like a kid. Um, the stakeouts. We'd spend hours just standing outside the elevator waiting to see if he would show up for work, not knowing where he was. Checking social media like at midnight because people were posting on, I forget, was it probably Twitter, Instagram? Yeah, Twitter and Instagram. The mayor shopping for alcohol and people taking kind of surreptitious pictures. And then I have some sort of regrets about our coverage. I think by and large, it was a great era for journalism. I think also the Ford show kind of obscured some policy stuff. I think, and even during the 2014 mayoral election, like I think I wish we'd done a better job relentlessly covering, John Tory's transit proposals that haven't really come to fruition because they were never very realistic. But like the Ford show was the story, and so I think we missed. It didn't entirely miss, but didn't devote quite sufficient attention to some other matters. And there are particular, there's some particular stories that I have some regrets over. Like, there's this sort of infamous one where we wrote about a woman making fun of Rob Ford for buying KFC. I think it was when he was on this famous diet. I think there's some stuff we could have done without. On the whole, though, like it was just an amazing time to be a journalist. It was so exhilarating. You're so competitive. You have the biggest municipal story maybe on the continent, and just digging for scoops and dealing with sources. It was just so interesting and fun, although exhausting and hard too.
Yeah. So let's turn to your journey to Washington. And as you mentioned earlier, you came to cover American politics as the primary campaigns were heating up, and nobody foresaw what the next 5 years were going to be like. But at what point did you kind of switch or add to your repertoire, I guess, in addition to just sort of covering American politics in a typical way? Did you add to your repertoire this fact-checking process?
It was in late 2016 that it really happened. I think I'd done sort of scattered fact checking before that, but it was in September 2016 that it just struck me that Trump was lying so much, and it wasn't being covered as a central story of his candidacy. Like he would do speeches where he would make 20 false claims, and the coverage of that speech would just be like, Trump, speaks on immigration, and it would not say anywhere in the story or in the written story or the TV news story that like Trump was incessantly dishonest in the speech. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to bring attention to this just by tweeting about it. I didn't quite know yet how to incorporate it into my regular coverage because I was a Canadian correspondent for the Toronto Star. It wasn't my job to be fact checking, really, or it wasn't in the initial job description. And so I just started tweeting about it, like tweeting lists of false things he said that day. And a few days into it, maybe 5 or 6 days into it, Michael Moore, the filmmaker, tweeted something like, this Canadian journalist every day on Twitter puts out a list of all the lies Donald Trump has told. He shames the US media. And that got like 10,000 retweets, and I got tons of followers from it. And I seriously thought like, oh my God, I have to do this every day now to satisfy these new followers. So I started doing it every day, and quickly saw there was a, although some people didn't like it and I got criticism for both the thing in general and for specific fact checks, there was clearly a huge hunger for this and an audience for it.
So that's it. That was the turning point. Was the Michael Moore retweet,
Yeah,
basically?
yeah, it
Yeah,
really was. Yeah.
yeah. And then, I mean, what kind of reaction did you get at that point? Because obviously, like everything in America right now, you're going to get rabid support and vehement opposition, right?
Yeah, so as all it was a mix, of course, as you said. So tons of people were like, "Thank you, I need this. This is great information," or "I've been waiting for someone to focus on the lying like this." There were also people who were like, "This is nitpicking," or "Who cares about this? He's still gonna drain the swamp," or "This is evidence that you're biased," or people who weren't even that polite, who would just send hate mail. I even, I'd get people telling me, "Go back to Canada. We don't care what you have to say." So uh, it was a mix, but there was enough positive that I thought, okay, enough people want this to keep doing it.
And it started as a sideline, though, right? But I guess
Yeah.
eventually it just became more and more of your job, right?
Yeah. So when I was at first, it was a real sideline. I was churning out, feature articles or analysis articles about the campaign and other stuff. And then it, became more and more of my sort of, I don't want to say personal brand because I hate that phrase, but it became what I was known for, at least in the U.S. And I started getting invited on MSNBC and CNN to talk about it. And then basically, CNN made this offer to do it full time, to be a full time fact checker, which I never planned to do and never planned to be at a TV place, although I'm still writing articles. And so I sort of just fell into this full time role, and never was the plan to be a fact check guy.
And what was that like when you get approached by CNN? Because obviously you're already working for one of the biggest newspapers in North America, and you're in Washington, but for a Canadian journalist to suddenly get a call from CNN is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it was exciting. I at first I was like, well, I don't really want to leave. I have a great job, but yeah. So I won't get into like all the back and forth, and talks with CNN and stuff. But basically, I came to the realization that if I want to make an impact, and that's always sort of been my biggest goal, like just be useful, do important work in some way, then where better for this particular stuff, at least for this period of time. It was 2019. I started there in June 2019. So between 2019 and 2020, where can I have more of an impact than this huge platform? Not only TV, but they have a huge, they have like I think 40 million Twitter followers or something. I might be wrong. They have huge, website audience and app audience. And so, long term, I can reevaluate. Maybe I'll go back to a newspaper. Maybe I'll go back to Canada. But for now, this is the best place to be.
So tell me a bit about the process of fact checking. And first of all, you're doing it as Donald Trump in a lot of cases as he's speaking while he's speaking live. So is effectively your schedule dictated by Donald Trump's schedule?
Yeah, my schedule matches Trump. So when I see he has a no event day, like the day when we're recording this, it's kind of wonderful because I'm still working hard, but it's not quite as breakneck. So yeah, if he has a rally at 10 p.m. Eastern because he's on the West Coast or something, yeah, then I'm fact checking him at 10 p.m. If he's on Fox and Friends, the Fox News morning show he loves at 7 a.m., then I'll try to wake up and fact check that. Yeah, so very much dictated by his Twitter and other schedule. And honestly, the process is journalism. So as a journalist, you might have to just do a Google search to verify something. And often with Trump, his lies are so simple, like, he'll just give a wildly wrong number. You type in one thing in Google, you're like, okay, that's wrong. Sometimes it's more involved. So after we finish taping this, I'm going to continue catching up on stuff that I didn't do when I was on vacation a little while ago. And a bunch of it involves calling and emailing experts. For one of them, I've reached out to Colin Powell, former Secretary of State in general, because Trump made a claim about him that I don't think is quite right. So it's calling people, calling experts, calling the subject or emailing the subject of Trump's claims, and just trying to get people to weigh in, either to help me because they're an expert, or to go on the record and say, no, that's not what happened in this private conversation. Trump has described another way. And so all the all the tools we use as a regular journalist, I have to use as a fact checker.
When you talk about your vacation, does that mean you're going back and reviewing all of the stuff that you might not have seen live because you were on holidays, and because you're keeping this massive tally, right?
That's right. So the tally is kind of I'm proud of it. It's also kind of the bane of my existence, because like it means effectively you never just go away. When I am on vacation, I won't watch Trump. I won't really read about Trump on Twitter, but because I'm trying to count every false claim he makes, it means that when I come back, I have to read or watch that stuff that I missed. So I never just get to vanish and forget that stuff that happened over a week. So yeah, that's what I'm doing, going back over last week and trying to fact check everything he said.
So what is subject to fact checking and what isn't? And that may seem like a semantic question, but there are some things that people say in speeches that are matters of opinion, that are their interpretation of things, that are where there is some license, as opposed to saying, for example, the gross domestic product was X when in fact it was Y.
Absolutely. And I think one of the ways that fact checkers sometimes get themselves in trouble is trying to write a fact check piece about something that's more subjective or opinion. And it seems, people will laugh at them on Twitter and be like, how do you fact check that claim? So I try to be judicious about what I fact check, and I try to give wide latitude for Trump to express opinions. So some other fact checkers, for example, have fact checked Trump's frequent claim that, at least before the pandemic, the U.S. economy was the best it's ever been. And fact checkers are like, no, that's wrong. GDP growth has been faster in various other periods. But to me, it's like, what does best mean? You could say, okay, like, it's the most technologically advanced. We have the most people working, although that number just kind of steadily grows with time. So if he says best or greatest, stuff like that, I'm like, you know what, even if I could add, 50 more false claims to my tally this month because he's saying, not in a month, but over a few months because he's saying various things are best and greatest. I want to be fair to him and let him say subjective stuff.
So you don't touch that stuff. It really comes down to the things that are inarguably facts.
Yeah, and I'm sure, like, if someone were to go through the database, you could find some stuff where people would say, "Oh, that's subjective." So I'm not perfect in this rule, and some things I'm like, well, it's kind of subjective, but I think it's more of a factual claim. So there's subjectivity on my part, but I do try to let the subjective stuff go.
Yeah. Now, is there a risk that if your job is to call out Donald Trump's lies, that in itself threatens your own objectivity? Is there a risk in that?
Possibly. I think, like, some people have asked me if I'm rooting for Trump to win because that will keep me in this, prominent role. Like, isn't there an incentive for you to have Donald Trump around? Like, no, like I was a journalist before I started counting Donald Trump's lies. I'll just do something else. And in a lot of ways, it would be easier for my life. Like, I would have more sleep, more rest, more spare time. I think, when I watch a Trump speech, like, although my job is to fact check Trump, I'm not like rooting for there to be a lot of lies in the speech. Like, it's frankly easier for me if, the rare times that he gives if he's on script, especially if he'll give a relatively factual speech, that's easier for me because I don't have to, call and email people about that speech and, spend a lot of time on it. And so, I'm not like rooting for lies, and I'm not like, trying to find lies where there aren't some, just that the fact is that there are a lot of lies in most of his speeches.
I want to talk about this in the context of truth and politics, because I think one of the big questions that a lot of people have is how much of this is Donald Trump, and how much of this is Donald Trump's an example of something or a symptom of something? Do you think that this is a uniquely bad time for truth in politics beyond just Donald Trump?
I don't think there's evidence for that. I think we heard some of those same questions about Rob Ford. Like, is this evidence of some sea change in the nature of political rhetoric or political honesty? But then, Toronto elected John Tory, who it certainly is not always honest or accurate, but it's like traditional political, okay, that's spin, that's exaggeration. He left something out. He's not, as far as I know, like denying, some sensational allegation that actually, occurred, like for denying he smoked crack. And I think with Trump, like you just look around American political life. I think that I should say, I think Trump has spawned this kind of conservative world of people repeating and echoing his very false rhetoric. So I think he has contributed to a general worsening of the culture around the issue of truth. But you look around, like Marco Rubio or other prominent Republican senators, like they're just doing the same spin and stretching and exaggeration as they always did. It's like, it's not novel stuff. So I think a lot of this, like the serial lying, serial exaggerating, the lying about trivial matters all the time, I do think it's pretty particular to this one unique man.
Does that mean then that, in theory, and I know you don't want to make predictions, but if that's the case, that American politics could go back to some kind of normal somewhere down the road after and I'm not suggesting that the Trump phenomenon ends with him losing an election or him serving 2 terms and exiting the White House after 2 terms, because he still has an impact beyond, as every president does, but particularly one of his game-changing nature, but that there is the potential to sort of return to normal in political discourse.
I think so. And I think Joe Biden, he has told stories that are flat out untrue. He said he got arrested, fighting for Nelson Mandela. And so I think on the scale, there's some politicians who don't have a history of making stuff up in that way. So Biden is highly imperfect. There'll still be fact checking to do if Biden wins, but it's for sure more normal. It's less frequent. He's more scripted. His speeches are more vetted, and the written texts are much less likely to include, prepared lies than Trump's prepared texts are. So yeah, I think if Biden were to win, it will definitely revert to something much closer to normal.
Tell me what it's like to kind of become part of this story around Trump, because obviously you're now because of this fact checking role you have and the attention that's been drawn to it, you're a figure in American politics to some extent. What's that been like for you?
Well, I would sort of gently push back and say, like, I still just feel like a reporter. I don't feel like I'm like really a player in the arena in the way that a politician is. But yeah, it's been like kind of strange and surreal, even just to be on TV sometimes, like after the Trump briefings, when the Wolf Blitzer will have me on in a panel, or now a virtual panel with Dr. Sanjay Gupta and Jim Acosta and the top political analyst Gloria Borger and me, and it's like, how how did this happen? This is so weird. So the whole thing, like from the the Twitter following to being on air with some of these people is very bizarre, and I don't take it for granted, and I don't think it'll last forever. So I'm just trying to, despite the kind of exhaustion, I'm just trying to enjoy it, while it exists.
Yeah, and what do you enjoy about it? What do you find satisfying about the work that you're doing?
Well, I think like just factually, and not as a boast. I think some of the fact checking I'm doing, like especially on TV, would not happen if I weren't doing it. Like, it doesn't happen on a lot of other networks. I think CNN reporters like Acosta, Caitlin Collins, others, they do a good job of fact checking in their segments, but like the kind of sustained attention to what Trump said at a briefing that wasn't true, is something that I have brought, because their job is, they can quickly point out the lies, but they have to report more broadly on the news. What happened? What are their sources telling them? So CNN having me there to be like, here is a minute of facts for you that the president didn't give you, both from an informational perspective, getting people the info, and then from an accountability perspective, to some extent holding the president accountable for the dishonesty. I think that's, to fill that role is fulfilling for me.
And why do you think it is that mainstream journalism, because this is how you got into it, as you explained it, is that other people were covering Trump events where he would lie 10 times, and they would just cover the subject of his speech? Why is it that, did he normalize it in his own behavior in some way, or what is it that has led us to a point where the facts aren't as relevant in political reporting?
I think it took a while for the U.S. media to wake up to the nature of Trump's rhetoric, and particularly how dishonest it was. I think people in all jobs, you kind of just do what you've always done. And so for previous presidents who were more factual, previous candidates even, it was often much more sufficient to just cover the speech. You quote the speech, you quote what the critic or the opposing candidate said about it, and you call it a day, and you've written a factual, solid report. Because those people, Barack Obama or Mitt Romney or John McCain or whoever, they weren't saying 20 things that weren't true in the speech. And so, you take that model, you apply it to Trump because it's what you've always done, or because you think, okay, I know a bunch of things weren't true in that speech, but we'll give that to the dedicated fact checker. That's not my job to say in a news story something is false. Or because the reporter does think that, but someone higher up at the station or at the paper doesn't want them to do that in the news story. I think there's pressure from above. So I think, there's sort of inertia, but also, unease about, being perceived to, basically, I think for a lot of people for a while, and I think decreasingly now, it was perceived as inappropriate opinion to say in a news story, whether it's TV or newspaper or radio or whatever, that's a lie, or even that's not true, or that's false. And I think now, more people are coming around to the view that that's just objective journalism to say that a false thing is false.
I wonder if there's another element here, Daniel. It just occurred to me that once upon a time, the media would have covered events where politicians were speaking, and they would have been the filter in terms of what got reported and what didn't. So if a candidate made false claims or a president made false claims, and you didn't include it in the story, then nobody was hearing those false claims. Whereas now, because so much of politics is delivered live, and that's a fairly recent phenomenon, that the false claims are getting through to the public in a way that perhaps they didn't 20, 30 years ago.
That's a great point. That's absolutely true. And I think that increases the need for fact checking. Although there can be a mismatch between the forums where people are consuming the false claims and the forums where the claims are being fact checked. So, a Trump speech might not be aired on any network other than Fox News. Fox News is not going to fact check it. I might fact check it in an article on CNN.com, but those Fox viewers might not read it. So it's imperfect, but yeah, it's definitely a different era. And on Twitter, Trump can go directly with false claims to his supporters without any filter. Yeah, it's a very different environment than it was, even 10, but certainly 15, 20 years ago.
What are your observations about the state of America now, leaving Trump and the current administration aside? There obviously, with or without Donald Trump, there's polarization. There are deep divisions in America. And what's your sense of what's going on in the country right now?
I mean, there's so much going on. It's hard for me to have a full sense, just sort of being stuck here in Washington. But it's a troubled place. It's a place with a lot of problems right now. There's a lot of anxiety and people with real tangible reasons for it. People, I forget the exact percentage, but a very high percentage of Americans know personally someone who has gotten the coronavirus. The number of deaths is staggering. The economy, we're still at 10% unemployment, although it's gotten better over the last couple months. we're still down, millions and millions of jobs from where we were in February. And so, and then people are worried about, the political situation. Trump supporters, a lot of them believe that the country will go down the tubes if Biden's elected, and a lot of Biden supporters, worried what an unchecked Trump would do in a second term. Would he be on even worse behavior than they think he's been on in this first term? So I think the election heightens the anxiety. It's a very tense, stressed out, difficult place right now.
When this is all over, what do you think some of the lessons are that you're going to take away from this experience?
So many. I'll be, I think, convinced of the importance of challenging lies. Trying to confront powerful people with them. But again, just learning, how much we can take for granted improperly or wrongly about the state of an electorate or the state of a country or a city. So making sure that you as a journalist challenge your own biases and assumptions, and I think we all sort of understand a lot more. Trump has sort of clarified a lot about American politics and the American electorate that we may not have known before. So I think, I don't know, there have been so many lessons of these 5 years of Trump.
Before we wrap up, Daniel, I got to ask you a little bit about karaoke rapping and also country music. So you got to tell me, like, what would have been a go-to song for you when you were doing karaoke rap?
Well, I would mix up. I would do some, very profane, vulgar, sometimes honestly misogynistic songs. You shouldn't teach your children, but like "Holiday Inn" by Chingy, that's a favorite of mine. But I try to mix it up with, some Will Smith, for example. Miami or Getting Jiggy with It, just to keep it clean and, more family friendly. So it would be a mix.
And was it because you liked rap music, or was it because the image of you doing rap music was part of the shtick? It
started, I grew up like with hip hop, and I listen to it less these days, but just because I liked it and I wanted to do it. And then I realized that people found it kind of hilarious. So, it just encouraged me.
All right. And so tell me about the country music phase you're in right now. Who are you into?
I just love it. I love so many people. I think my favorite era was the 90s, even though I didn't grow up with it then. I just love the strings and the pedal steel and the big choruses. So I love like George Strait or the Dixie Chicks, people like that. But in terms of current people, I love like Luke Combs, Chris Stapleton. So I think it's gotten worse. Like I sound like an old man. I think it's gotten worse over the years, but there's still some modern people I like.
Right on. Well, Daniel, this has been really fascinating and very illuminating to hear your perspective on all of these topics and to learn a little more about this place, this unique position you occupy in fact-checking the president. It's been a great discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
It feels like Daniel Dale is stuck with this huge responsibility now. He's put himself in this position where he has to catch up after he takes vacation and fact-check everything Donald Trump said while he was away. And his schedule is basically dictated by whenever Donald Trump is speaking. I really learned a lot in that conversation, and one of the key messages for me was that we don't necessarily need to despair about the future of politics, that there's actually a good chance we can return to some kind of normal in the future. Another lesson I'll take away from this conversation is Daniel's message about not following the path that everybody else expects you to. I want to thank Daniel again for being with us on Digging Deep. If you enjoyed this episode, then please review it and share it with others. That will help us produce more great content. And if you want to start digging deep into topics and lessons like this, please subscribe to our weekly newsletter and read my blog. My website is letsdigdeep.com. Letsdigdeep.com. Thank you for listening.